Are you ready for a magical adventure? Get cozy and snug as we embark on a whispered story together. It's time to let go of all your worries and embrace the wonder that awaits. Imagine you're floating on a cloud high above the world. Take a deep breath and feel the calmness wash over you. You're safe, you're loved, and it's time to relax. In this enchanted realm, anything is possible. You might meet a friendly dragon who loves to tell jokes, or a mischievous fairy who grants wishes. Let your imagination run wild. As the whispers weave their way into your ears, feel yourself getting more and more comfortable. Picture your favourite place in nature, a sunny meadow, a cosy treehouse, or a secret garden. That's your special place, just for you. Let the whispers gently carry you to a land where dreams come true and adventures await. As you listen, feel your eyelids getting softer and heavier. Allow the soothing words to wrap around you like a cozy blanket, guiding you towards a night filled with magical dreams. You're drifting off to sleep now, carried away by the whispers and the comforting rhythm of your breath. The dreams are just beginning, and you're the hero of your own story. So snuggle down, my little adventurer, and let the whispered story whisk you away to a world where imagination knows no bounds. Rest well, dream big, and wake up ready for tomorrow's magical journey. Good night, sweet dreamer. May your dreams be filled with joy and wonder. You are listening to Hodgepodge. Once upon a smelly time, there lived a goblin who stunk of trump, wheat, and sweaty feet. The kindest way to describe the sprite in this story would be a hoarder. And if you were being truthful, he was a notorious thief whose tomfooleries did nothing else but upset and cause a lot of trouble for his victims. His horrendous stash of bits and pieces stunk of something beyond foul, generally the contents of a bucket thrown from an upstairs window. This smelly being may be tiny, but he was head and shoulders above all others when it came to mischief and stealing. You certainly would never buy a used pack horse from this guy, as it was more than likely it would have been stolen or have dodgy pots. This reprobate goes by the name of Hodgepodge. Hodgepodge wasn't ashamed of his social class. The revolting squatter happily renamed his medieval abode Goblin Tower. The circular medieval tower sat astride the age-old city walls of Chester in the northwest of England, with an exclusive gated entrance and stunning views. It was here he had lived all his life, rent-free, and it was here he felt like a king. But he was here for a legitimate ancient reason, to guard the Anglo-Saxon coins which had been passed down by his thieving ancestors. The coins were hidden in a secret underground store beneath the tower's floor. The cellar space was enough for someone of Hodgepodge's build, which was in proportion to a medium-sized pig. Funny enough, he had big floppy ears, and if his large leathery nose were flatter, he would definitely look like a pig. He had a great sense of smell due to the size of his nostrils and had this incredible ability to sniff and root out food despite the overpowering smell he emitted from himself. He was able to move sufficiently around this confined space which spanned the whole width of the upper floor. He could hide out and lay low for days when something big had gone down. He kept supplies of food and drink here and had a special place to wee and poo, which he never emptied. It was self-emptying, if you like. It either seeped out through the gaps at the bottom of the compartment, or dried up and decomposed itself over time and left a disgusting odour. The 122 coins held a healing power which would not work if they fell into non-goblin hands. The Folklore Association had regrettably found out about them back in 1694, and 6 years later, by law they had enforced to control their usage and safeguard their secret remained. It stipulated that Goblin Tower should always have a resident warden from the goblin race in return for this rent-free accommodation. The aforementioned goblin would heal any Chester citizen in need of it by pressing one of the coins against his or her flesh, which would heal the most debilitating illness. In human hands it would be worth nothing more than chocolate money. So the jammy rascal did not actually have to pay for anything, as what he did not have given to him by the law, he just helped himself to anyway. But even though the coins were rightfully his, the hobgoblin could never be allowed to spend them to his disappointment. This light-fingered goblin would sell anything if he could, even the clothes off his grandmother's back, so it was a good job. At least there was some perks to the job. He would never become sick, not even a cough. But he takes these powers for granted and does not appreciate what he has, which is something that money cannot buy. Each day the little man would set out, scurrying along the city walls, deceiving and robbing and stinking all the places out. The days would be overshadowed by this deceit and the mischievous pranks. He would return with his loot, proud of every hoard, hated by many. If it was shiny, he had to have it, and if it was not nailed down, he took it. It all added to his assortment of odds and sods, so much so, it was getting to the point he could hardly move around the tower for the lack of space these days. He had a saying, "What you see is what you get." Then, one cold day, Hodgepodge returned from a grueling day of pilfering with his hood clenched tightly around his uncombed tops, hot-footing his way along the city's Roman walls. He had wet his pants several times, since he didn't have time to find a place to go. He did not care. He was too busy for mundane things like personal hygiene. This was about the 5th day this week he had done this, and he didn't even bother to change his clothes. Who would complain since he lived in the tower alone? Anyway, this day he had upset one local too many, and it wasn't just because of the foul smell. He had to make a quick getaway only to find his tower had been invaded. How was he going to explain this one to the F.A.? He immediately hid and observed. It was barbaric. Men rooted through his collection of rubbish, throwing it into a pile to burn or recycle. Moving his things from their usual places was not a good thing. Hodgepodge could not breathe and felt a panic attack looming. Luckily, the shiny things he classed as valuable were hidden with the coins under the floor. Didn't they know the tower was protected under goblin law? They had no rights. They scrubbed and fumigated his living quarters. Many more men rallied around beneath the walls in an opening at ground level under the tower. It was packed with yarn and huge containers full of gooey tar. It smelt very nearly as bad as Hodgepodge's quarters. Some of the men felt sick and had to peg their noses or wrap scarves around their faces to cover their mouths and noses. They were overcome with tar and smells of Hodgepodge. Once the large iron gates were locked, they left. The pot-bellied goblin took the opportunity and sped into the tower. With a struggle, he squeezed into the space under the floor where his shiny lip remained. From now on, he would have to live in these small boundaries amongst the pots and pans and drinking vessels he classed as precious, and see who the new occupants were. Then he would introduce himself. The next morning broke with a distinct sound of voices. Hodgepodge bravely pushed the large sandstone boulder he had cunningly wedged over the hole where he hid. He popped his head out. It was safe. He crept out of the tower and peeped below. A group of men were running back and to, unravelling twines and threads of yarn and fixing them to a large wheel device some distance away across the grove below. John Pemberton, a voice called. Hodgepodge ducked. How's the rope walk coming along? Two men approached and greeted each other. John Pemberton was a respectable member of the community, the mayor of Chester no less, and now a proprietor of a rope-making business. All set, sir. We shall have our first order complete by the end of the week. The little podgy onlooker had shillings in his eyes. What you see is what you get, he whispered to himself before scuttling away. The next day, John Pemberton had entered the tower where he sat all day, watching over his workers below. He did not trust his workers to put all their energy into it, so he gestured to them from his tower to make sure they weren't idle and booted anyone out who appeared work shy. Hodgepodge had been out early on his rounds, not expecting to see him there. Pemberton had a comfortable chair brought in, and facilities had been arranged for his own personal refreshment to make this amount of sitting a tad easier on him while his men and even some children sweated below. The man grumbled a lot and shouted frequently at his workers to move faster. He had deadlines to meet and more ships were coming in and they expected rope. Hodgepodge decided now was a good time for introductions. Pemberton jumped at the sight of him and instantly stood up from the security of his armchair. The fright had left him a little shaken for a moment. What are you doing in Pemberton's parlour? The mayor asked sternly. He felt fairly chuffed with the new name of the tower he'd just conjured up over a cuppa, but didn't show it. Pemberton's parlour. Hodgepodge could not believe what he was hearing. How dare he? He composed himself and said, Hodgepodge, sir. He held out a reasonably clean hand, apart from a few poo stains and a bit of soil. I beg your pardon. The mayor flinched. He shied away from the goblin's dirty hand. The smell had put him off. You have no business being here. My name is Hodgepodge. I am honoured to meet you, sir. I have come to offer my services and can help you spin your yarn into rope. All I ask for in return is food and a few cups of that delicious tea of yours. He used his poshest voice in the hope he would appear professional. Pemberton desperately wanted to meet his deadlines, and an extra pair of hands would be appreciated clean or not, and at hardly any cost, so he agreed. The next day, Hodgepodge worked all day and into the early evening spinning rope, only stopping for a bit of food and a brew or two. At the end of the day, his pile of rope was the highest. The owner could plainly see how productive the little creature was at little cost to him, so was satisfied he had got the best end of the deal. That night, Hodgepodge could not help himself. It was in a goblin's nature to play practical jokes. It wasn't his best prank, but he thought it would be amusing to replace the mare's sugar for salt, and laughed so much he nearly wet himself. He couldn't imagine anything funnier than what the look on the mare's face would be like when he tasted it. The next morning, Hodgepodge prized himself from under the floorboards and discreetly entered the mayor's office like he had just come from somewhere else. He had come to offer his services once again, and in the nick of time too. The mayor took a mouthful of tea when he entered, much to Hodgepodge's delight, then spat it out, chucking the rest of the cup's contents out of the tower onto his workers below. The man was furious and took a while to sort himself out, while Hodgepodge struggled painfully to contain his laughter. This time, Hodgepodge did not want to drink the mare's tea or eat his food, especially now it had been tampered with. Instead, he asked for one of the mare's fancy and hopefully embroidered jackets as payment. The fact the mayor was 6'2", and the little urchin was 3 foot, nothing did not bother him. The jacket would clearly drown the little soul of a goblin, but it would hide his wet pants when necessary. The mayor had hundreds of jackets, and for him it was money for old rope, so to speak. He agreed, urging him to get to work. And work he did. Hodgepodge worked all day and into the early evening, hardly stopping at all. He worked wonders with building stockpiles, and supported the slow ones who could tolerate him being near them. Pemberton took notice, and despite the stench, he knew this foolish being was worth having around. To keep him happy, he took off the jacket he wore that day and gave it to him. Hodgepodge pranced around wearing it like he was a king as it trailed behind him like a cloak. His employer laughed at his stupidity. "What would you like tomorrow?" he asked. "A sock? I could maybe stretch to a pair," he mocked. Hodgepodge merely laughed along with him. That night, when everyone had gone home, Hodgepodge broke into the store and stole the rope he and the others had spent all day making, and tied together the horse cartwheels of all the carts used to transport the stock to the buyers. It took most of the night, twisting reef knots, rolling hitches, looping figure-8 knots, and coiling bowlines. There were so many. His rope talents were exceptional and never-ending, and gave him hours of laughter and entertainment. This has got to be one of his best pranks ever. He had excelled himself this time. The next day, Pemberton grew so angry when he found the carts roped together like that, and blew his top. With fists clenched and his face glowing like a lantern, he yelled. Tools were thrown, and buckets were kicked in a temper. The rope grew coward and fear of being picked to sort this mess out. The goblin shenanigans had done such a superb job of costing Mayor Pemberton hours of workers' pay to get it unroped. The first deadline was approaching, meaning all his men had to work without pay all that night. The day and night brought Hodgepodge hours of happiness as he spent most of his time battling to contain his laughter. The mayor was beginning to dislike the creature more than ever, and noticing that Hodgepodge seemed so knowledgeable in helping the men unravel some of the knots, he couldn't help but wonder if he had something to do with it. Soon, some of the overworked men who were so sick with heat, exhaustion, and dehydration started to collapse. Not realizing he was one of the underlying causes for making the men work harder, Hodgepodge felt pity for them and decided he should bring out one of the healing coins from under the tower's floor and make them better again. One by one, he discreetly closed the sick workers' hands around the coin for 1 minute. By a small miracle, they felt better again. Unbeknown to Hodgepodge, John Pemberton witnessed the goblin with his own eyes. Amazed by what seemed to be healing hands, he knew he had to keep the goblin on his payroll whatever it took. Shoelaces, scarves, ties, he could have whatever he wanted. He clearly was an asset to the company. Funny enough, the following week, the mayor turned up to Pemberton's parlour 5 minutes later than usual, shivering, coughing, and sputtering all over the place. The man was a complete mess. He demanded to see Hodgepodge. This time he would allow the goblin's unclean hands to touch him to make him better. He even removed the silken scarf he usually used to cover his mouth and nose when in his vicinity, mainly because he'd lost his sense of smell. "Hodgepodge," he sputtered and coughed. "I've seen you do it. Make me better." He dropped dramatically to the floor, unable to pull himself up. The little man had to give this some serious thought and took some time over it while the man choked in front of him. What was in it for him? "Hodgepodge," the sick man croaked. The goblin eventually agreed. "I will heal you, sir, but in return you must tell me where you think I live, or you will have to give the rope business to me." The sick man choked even more at the thought. "This isn't time for games," he managed to wheeze. "Get me better." Hodgepodge did not like his tone, but still, He couldn't see the man suffer like that. He carefully placed the Anglo-Saxon coin in the mayor's hand without him seeing for 1 minute, and then he felt completely better. The mayor did not see it happen. He did not feel it happen, and he did not know how it could have happened. But it did, and he didn't care how, as long as he was better. Thank you, thank you. It was a miracle. The mayor sounded grateful for a change. He scrambled to his feet and sat on his chair, mopping his brow with his silken scarf, and then placed it over his face. He could smell Hodgepodge again. Let me know what you would like. My narrow-brimmed silk-top hat and flared frock coat. Pemberton had upgraded his payments to him in line with what he thought his services were worth. You have to guess, Mr. Pemberton, or the robot would belong to me, said the little bandit, letting him know exactly what he wanted. Oh, the man stuttered. You could have my favourite waistcoat with the high upstanding collar. You would look stylish in that. Hodgepodge shook his head. Pemberton was so worried by the goblin's powers, he made one last attempt to persuade him. I can give you a permanent job, a job for life, pleaded the mayor. You could live here in the store shed with your own handcrafted chamber pot and a clean jug of water every single night. The man had selfish reasons to keep the goblin there for the rest of his life. He needed him to heal him each time he was sick. You would have to clean yourself up, of course, he added. We couldn't have the rope smelling of something you'd trodden in. Hodgepodge thought it sounded lavish, but luxuries like that did not appeal to him because it just wasn't enough. He wanted more. I will give you a total of 5 guesses, and 5 guesses only, Mayor Pemberton, so use them wisely. And what if I don't? The man asked. Then a terrible curse will befall on your establishment, pronounced by the supernatural spiritual power of the Folklore Association, and will last. He paused dramatically, his eyes widened, a bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face, not because of fear, but because he was hot. Then he said, forever, in a silly deep voice. This was not true, of course. Hodgepodge had made it all up. He had once overheard a drunken gypsy cursing a local sestrian, which put the fear of God in them, so much so they immediately tripped and fell head first into the amphitheatre, knocking themselves out cold, believing they were cursed, when in fact it was just drunken words the gypsy could not even remember ever saying. The local man met with a series of unfortunate events and lived a miserable life. Hodgepodge had seen him many times wandering around, covered in bruises and supporting broken bones. The gypsy even tried to put things right by telling him it wasn't true, but the man still met with these disastrous occurrences. So, in Hodgepodge's wisdom, he decided to play on the owner's fear of his magical powers and do the same. He wept, and Mr. Pemberton bowed his head in defeat, which was incredible from a man of his position. Surely he didn't believe in goblins and folklore associations. It seemed he did. 5 guesses, repeated Hodgepodge as he left. He departed a sting which left a sickening reminder. He was good at this. He left the mayor in such a quandary. The man was glad he felt better, of course, but at what price? Hodgepodge waited a week before Mr. Pemberton would come and talk to him about the matter again. Right, let's finish this. Before you start, I need you to sign this contract, said Hodgepodge, pulling out a grubby piece of paper from an unmentionable place about his person. He had scribbled an agreement which stated Mr. Pemberton had to sign over the whole rope business to him if he did not guess correctly where Hodgepodge lived after 5 attempts. Give it here. Mr. Pemberton snatched it and immediately signed it to the goblin's astonishment. He could see it now. Sleek suits, servants. He could live like someone intelligent for a change, and not a daft order. Holidays, he suddenly thought. He could visit Cousin Trump up in Australia and attach corks to his hat. So, would you like to start now? He asked the man. Yes, let's get this over with. It's simple. You don't have a home. You're a beggar." He looked smug. The answer was staring him in the face all this time. The little man looked destitute. He smelt like a tramp. He clearly was a homeless person. "Wrong," smelled Hodgepodge. "Right well. Do you live in the city's rows?" The rows in the city centre are continuous out-timbered galleries which can be reached by steps and form a second row of shops above those at street level. Lots of unmentionable things happen here in the darkened hours. It smells like you, so I imagined you must spend a lot of time there. Where will I sleep? It's so wooden and hard, said Hodgepodge. The castle, then, said the mayor confidently. They have dungeons which would accommodate your needs. No, certainly not. Hodgepodge's face grew red. I would have to share with villains. He was horrified at the thought. The mayor deliberated at his desk for a few minutes. "Well, I know it's not Billy Harvey's well, because you wouldn't smell like you do. You would be clean, wouldn't you, with all that water? And you can't live in the Minerva Shrine's cave. There wouldn't be enough room for the two of you." He sat up straight. "I hope you are not counting these." The goblin's lips were beginning to form an unnaturally wide curve. "Of course not, sir." He couldn't hide it any longer, and did a little dance in his merriment. The man hadn't got a clue. "He will have that desk and his fancy cups and saucers thrown out first when he takes over. I've got it." He jumped up. "You live in the amphitheatre. It was built for animals, and well, you would fit in perfectly around there. You might even become some sort of bizarre attraction of sorts." Hodgepodge was not bothered by this comment. He clasped his hands together in happiness. Not only will he get his tower back, but he will be the owner of the rope business. "You only have one more guess." He bounced up and down to celebrate, sure he was going to get the final answer wrong. "You silly rascal," retorted the man. His voice sounded much louder and sterner. "You live here, right under the floorboards." How did you know?" Hodgepodge screeched. His whole new world came tumbling down around him like his hoard of rubbish. It wasn't difficult, was it? He sat back down, placing his feet up on the table. "When we arrived here, we had to decontaminate the place. When you turned up smelling of the same smell, well, it didn't take much to work out you were, to put it politely, residing somewhere within this building. I just had to find out where, and there weren't many places, were there?" The sprite's face screwed up into something uglier. The disappointment made his stomach feel bad, which wasn't good for the fresh air. "You understand, I can't have you living in this building. The smell, it's... Yes. Well, anyway, my customers may need to visit, you see. That is why this morning I had it all filled in." "No," Hodgepodge screamed. "What do you mean all filled in?" "Good old concrete. We did not bother with removing the junk. No one was willing to sort through it, but I guessed you wouldn't be bothered as it was just a load of rubbish, so they poured concrete in there. They were my things." He whimpered. The mayor had no idea what he had just done. It was an outrage. "The good news is, it's improved the smell in here." Well, it had, before you walked back in. How would Hodgepodge explain this to the FA? He was in violation of his contract. He would be relegated for breach of trust and condemned to live in the city sewers for the rest of his life. It stunk down there. But my offer still stands. John still needed the hard-working urchin. He was too valuable to him with his magic hands. He was convinced his offer was going to appeal to him. "You can have that job for life and live here in the store shed outside, with your very own beautifully handcrafted chamber pot and a clean jug of water every single night." "That was my home," cried the goblin. It wasn't the reaction John Pemberton was expecting. "I will provide plenty of food," he added, thinking this would swing it for him. The little creature lowered his head. "You can have all the clothes you need." It would be a life of luxury for someone like him. A bathtub. What a brilliant idea. He had surely won him over now. I will get my men to boil water for you every evening so you can soak in a hot bath. It will improve the smell around this place and make it easier for us all to work with you. We will all be happy. But the truth was, Hodgepodge was worthless to him now. All Hodgepodge could think about was his coins encased in a huge rock under the floorboards, his beautiful Goblin Tower with stunning views, hijacked and taken away from him, and the FA. Hodgepodge, the mayor snapped. Do you agree? Hodgepodge could not face the FA. There was no way he could stay here, no matter what the mayor offered him. With that, he turned and ran as fast as his smelly feet could take him. The last time he was seen was on the Rose, then in the castle dungeons, and once hanging around Billy Hobby's well, only to be moved on. He did not bother with the Minerva's shrine as there wasn't enough room, and there wasn't enough shelter in the amphitheatre. Then he disappeared. People say the FA did eventually catch up with him, and he was doomed to a disgusting life in the city's sewers, collecting things. Then in 1914, the priceless hoard of 122 Anglo-Saxon silver coins were finally found in Pemberton's parlour. Nobody knows who really put them there, and rumour has it that on a hot day you can sometimes smell and hear a goblin in the city's sewers below. The end. Good night and sleep well.